Hello. So, very good evening to all of you. Today, we are going to start Matthew Arnold and his two critical writings, The Study of Poetry and The Function of Criticism. In the previous class, we have discussed Matthew Arnold as a critic, and also we have seen him as the first modern critic. And we came to understand why he is considered as the first modern critic, because the critical aspects that he has brought about is very close to the modern age. That's why he came to be known as the first modern critic. And along with this, we also have seen Arnold, uh, who talked about his definition of poetry and the superiority of poetry, and he gives a completely different definition of what poetry is. He says poetry is the criticism of life, and also he developed certain theoretical aspects like his method, touchstone method. So touchstone method, where we see he believed in the high art, he believed in high seriousness, he believed in high destinies. Okay, he wants art to be superior, he wants poetry to be superior in rather instead of philosophy and religion, he finds supreme importance in poetry. This is a kind of poetry that brings emotion, and this emotion is attached with an idea. What kind of idea? It's a social and creative idea. Okay, so we will see many certain aspects specifically from these two particular writings. One is the study of poetry and the function of criticism. Okay, ये दो writings हमारे syllabus में है, and we will take up both of these today. So Arnold's literary context, Victorian poetry and cultural criticism. Now, in the previous lecture, I also talked about the crisis. Victorian era is an age of crisis. Lot of crisis took place in that age. Okay, Arnold wrote during a period of profound intellectual upheaval. Darwin's Origin of Species came out in 1859, isn't it? So, very important writing. Okay, Origin of Species by Darwin, which came out in 1859, which challenged religious orthodoxy, which challenged completely the biblical notion about the creation of the human beings, that it is the consumption of the forbidden fruit by Adam and Eve which made the world created. But no, Darwin challenged this religious orthodoxy. Darwin challenged this completely religious belief, and he says human beings came through evolution. Right. Whilst industrial expansion transformed traditional social structures. So, at one hand, there was industrialization which was happening. On the other hand, Darwin was writing about science, challenging religious superstitions, biblical beliefs about creation of human beings. Poetry, Arnold believed, could provide stability and moral direction. It is because there is nothing as such which can provide stability in the Victorian age, because everything was at a crisis. Everything was at the extreme level of crisis. Religious faith is gone, fellow feeling is gone, brotherhood is gone, human relationship are into crisis, everything is into crisis. So what can provide stability? What can provide peace? So it is poetry. According to Arnold, it is poetry which can provide morality, which can provide stability uh, amidst this cultural turbulence. Okay. As both a poet and critic, we have seen Arnold both as a poet and also today we are seeing him as a critic right now. He occupied a unique position. His own poetry explored themes of isolation. Look at his poems. Dover Beach, for example, that talks about themes of isolation, alienation, spiritual doubt, while his criticism sought to establish objective standards for literary excellence. He looks for objective standards. What should be the scientific excellence for poetry? We have to find out the higher sense of art. We have to develop high seriousness to understand and to establish art. Okay, so let us read classics, let us read ancients, read the best knowledge. Okay, he witnessed the decline of romantic idealism, because in the Victorian age, there was a decline, there is a fall of romantic idealism. No more subjective self, no more inner identity, no more imagination, no emotion. It is only, facts and figures only. In the Victorian age, economic uh, importance are at the limelight, at the cost of everything, and the rise of utilitarian values, prompting his defense of literature's essential role in civilization. So, these are the things that are happening. Another point, utilitarian values. Now, this is very much important to understand. What is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is a philosophical concept as well as a political concept. Utilitarianism is something that talks about the importance of utility, of the use value. Okay, for example, uh, you are making yourself superior without causing any harm to others is the philosophy of utilitarianism. Okay, make profit, make revenues, but without causing any harm to others. That is the philosophy of utilitarianism. But Victorian age took up only the first half of the philosophy, not the complete philosophy. What do I mean by this? Victorians took up the first half, that they will make profit, they will generate revenues, but they forgot the second part, without causing harm to others. Okay, so they forgot the second part and they just make profit, they just generate revenues without any concern to others' loss. Okay, so that is a kind of half-baked utilitarian application that was happening in the Victorian age. So economic money matters in the Victorian age. Here, capital is given more importance. Capital is prioritized over human bonding, filial touch, or family or any essential bonds in life. So economics and capitalism comes to the supreme position. So basically that is a false propagation of utilitarian concept. Okay, so these are the concepts that were going on during the Victorian era. Now, what are the key historical influences at that time? The Oxford movement and religious debate. There was always a dichotomy between science and religion, belief and doubt, scientific materialism and religious fanaticism. These are the binaries, these are the boundaries, these are the dichotomies that prevail throughout the Victorian era and also continue in the modern age also. Industrial capitalism and social change. Society is on the verge of completing its phase. Scientific materialism challenging faith, democratic reforms and mass education. People were becoming intellectual. There was that concept came and became very important in the high bro culture and low bro culture, that high art and low art. Okay, that the content which have the content which has intellectual merit is considered to be the mainstream literature, high culture, high art, and which those art which does not have intellectual merit are not considered high serious art. They are considered a non-serious art. They are considered, you know uh, low art, low bro culture, and that was high bro culture. So and also in terms of readership, okay, high bro readership and low bro readership. So that division became very prominent during Victorian era. Okay, a continental philosophical movements. One of them is utilitarianism. Okay, Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan. In Leviathan, he talks about utilitarianism. He says that make profit, make benefit, but without causing any harm to others. But Victorian age, took up the first half of this philosophy and do. Whatever do I mean whatsoever it doesn't concern anything. It concerns only profit, only economic profit. Okay, he Arnold served as school's inspector for 35 years, giving him unique insight into education's role in cultural transmission and the need for accessible yet rigorous literary standards. So Matthew Arnold looks for objective standards. He always looks for objective standards which must measure the quality of art, the standard of art. Okay, so and those objective standards must be high in sense, high in temperament, high in taste, high in culture. It must be superior, sophisticated and refined. Okay, so he looks for, takes recourse to classics, read their writing, read their rules. Okay, so he will talk about Homer and many other classics which he will, whom he will consider sort of uh, objective standards that we must follow to develop our art, to understand the high seriousness of art. Okay, so this is the basic idea of Arnold. चलो आगे बढ़ते हैं. Now, the writing that he in this writing, the study of poetry, he says, it published in 1880. He poetry as the supreme art form, not a drama, novel, short story. It is poetry, which has the potential to be the superior. In his seminal essay, Arnold proclaimed that poetry represents humanity's highest cultural achievement. Poetry is the best art form. It is the best form of art. Poetry can express the humanity's expression. Okay, he famously argued more and more mankind will discover that we have to turn to poetry to interpret life for us, to console us, to sustain us. In this Victorian world, it has nothing except instability, chaos, disorder. So, which art form can bring us peace and stability? It is not novel, it is not drama, it is not any other art form except poetry. It is poetry that can provide peace, stability, morality, and poetry will help us to interpret life for us, to console us, to sustain us. Okay, this was not just a mere aesthetic preference. He genuinely believed poetry could fulfill the functions previously performed by religion and philosophy. So Arnold considers poetry at the superior position. Poetry is first to religion and philosophy. They come in the second position. Which comes in the first position for Arnold? Poetry, not religion, not philosophy. Poetry is the supreme art form. Interpretive power. Poetry provides profound insights into human experience, offering clarity and understanding where other forms of discourse fail. It captures truth through beauty. So, poetry gives scope to interpret different ways. Okay, that's why poetry speaks the truth of life. Then consolation in times of suffering and doubt. Victorian era is an age of conflict, dichotomies, and doubts. In times of suffering and doubt, poetry offers comfort and meaning. Right? It speaks to universal human emotions and validates our deepest feelings. So, poetry is the supreme art form, not religion, not even philosophy. Then, sustaining force. Poetry strengthens the human spirit, providing moral guidance and inspiration to face life's challenges with courage and dignity. So we can see how Matthew Arnold gives prior importance to poetry rather than to philosophy or religion. So Arnold distinguished between genuine poetry and what he called historic or personal estimates, judgments clouded by nostalgia or biographical interest. True criticism, he insisted, must focus on the intrinsic merit of the work itself, measuring it against the very best examples from literary history. So, what is true criticism? It must focus on the intrinsic value of the work of art. It must focus on the intrinsic merit of the work itself. And how do you evaluate? How do you analyze that merit? By measuring it with those best works in literary history. So, classics. Okay, so classics is one of the examples. Classics is one of the torchlights for Arnold, that we must make a comparative study. We must make a comparative analysis that what are the similarities and differences. Do these aspects are at par with that? Is it qualified in comparison to those classic works? So based on that, we can see the highest art, highest form of art. Okay, so that was Arnold's true criticism. Now Arnold's touchstone method, इसके बारे में हम लोग पहले ही बात कर चुके हैं, but anyway, let us discuss it one, because in this writing, in the study of poetry, Arnold gives this idea touchstone method. Okay, measuring poetic excellence. How to measure poetic excellence. Okay, so before I talk about more on touchstone method, can you tell me a one-line explanation of what you understood touchstone method? Can you write down one line about touchstone method of Arnold? Just write down one or two line what you have understood, and then I will continue. Okay, so let me see. Kindly write down one line sentence of what you understood by touchstone method of Matthew Arnold. Yes, I'm waiting for you. Write it down. Yes, very good. By comparison and analysis, we can evaluate poetry. But what should be those? What should be the parameter for comparison? किसके साथ कंपैरिजन करेंगे? ये बताइए. किसके साथ कंपैरिजन करेंगे? कंपैरिजन तो करेंगे. यस, वेरी गुड. बट किसके साथ कंपैरिजन करेंगे? Classic poetry, excellent, very good. Classic poetry or the best literary works. Okay, what he wrote in this essay in the study of poetry, Arnold says the best works in literary history. And by saying best works, he refers to classics. Okay, not classic poetry, but classic literature. It can be anything. Okay, classic literature. The views that was given in the by the classic writers are also important, right? Very good. So you see, understood this thing. बहुत बढ़िया. चलो, आप लोगों को समझ आ रहा है. That is more important. Now, the touchstone principle. So Arnold developed his famous touchstone method as a practical tool for evaluating poetry, like a jeweler testing gold's purity against a standard stone. Critics should compare questionable passages against lines of unquestionable excellence from master poets like Homer, Dante, and Shakespeare. ये तीन नाम डायरेक्टली मेंशन्ड है इस एसे में इन द स्टडी ऑफ पोएट्री. यू मस्ट रीड द टेक्स्ट, द स्टडी ऑफ पोएट्री. मैं ये टेक्स्ट जो है, ये टेक्स्ट मैं सेंड कर दूंगा, ठीक है? इट इज नॉट मोर देन 5 to 6 पेजेस. 5 से 6 पेज का एक एसे है. रीड द एसे. आई एम गिविंग यू अ बुक नेम ऑल्सो. यू मस्ट बाय दिस बुक. बहुत अच्छा बुक है. The name of the book is just take care. Let me write. Okay, this is the name of the book. ये बुक का नाम है इंग्लिश क्रिटिकल टेक्स्ट्स बाय एनराइट एंड चिकेरा. Okay, write down this name, इंग्लिश क्रिटिकल टेक्स्ट्स बाय एनराइट एंड चिकेरा। ये एक इसमें कई सारे क्रिटिकल टेक्स्ट्स मिल जाएंगे आपको, अराउंड 12 to 15 टेक्स्ट्स यू विल गेट। बायोग्राफिया लिटरेरिया का 15th चैप्टर है, प्रेफेस टू लिरिकल बैलड्स का टेक्स्ट मिल जाएगा, स्टडी ऑफ पोइट्री मिल जाएगा, preface to Shakespeare by Samuel Johnson, and many Keats's letters, important letters. So this is very important book. इस ये बुक आप पूरा पढ़िए तो ये आपका criticism part बहुत अच्छा strong होगा. Okay, so buy this book, very important book. Or you can try in Google if you PDF version is if available, you must download it and keep it for reference. Okay, so who are the writers whom Arnold referred, like Dante, Shakespeare and Homer? Okay, Dante, Shakespeare and Homer. These touchstone passages embody what termed high seriousness. अगर ये आपको सिमिलैरिटी दिख रहा है क्लासिक राइटर के साथ, क्लासिक राइटर आप पढ़े और यू आर कंपैरिजन, यू आर इवेल्युएटिंग योर आर्ट इन with those masters, and if you find high seriousness in this art, in your art form, so it is qualified art. Okay, so that was the method, that was the touchstone method by Matthew Arnold. Okay, a quality combining profound thought, elevated emotion and perfect expression, that is called high seriousness. Very important, ये term बहुत important है. 20th century criticism में ये term बहुत criticize हुआ है कि कोई कल्चर हाई सीरियसनेस हमेशा, अभी जो आर्नल्ड को हाई सीरियस लग रहा है वो हाई सीरियस हमेशा रहेगा, इसका तो कोई गारंटी है नहीं. दांते इज अ मास्टर, शेक्सपियर इज ए मास्टर, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं है कि शेक्सपियर के राइटिंग्स में कोई क्रिटिसिज्म नहीं है, दांते के राइटिंग्स के अगेंस्ट में कोई क्रिटिसिज्म नहीं है, होमर के राइटिंग के अगेंस्ट में कोई क्रिटिसिज्म नहीं है, ऐसा बिल्कुल नहीं है. देयर आर लॉट ऑफ सॉलिड क्रिटिसिज्म अगेंस्ट even the classics. Okay, so this concept of high seriousness by Matthew Arnold has been criticized in the 20th century criticism. This is not a sustainable and valid critical method to evaluate any literary form. Okay, but anyway, this is Arnold's view that we need to remember and understand also for our exam. So Arnold talks about this high seriousness. कोई भी आर्ट फॉर्म में हाई सीरियसनेस होना ज़रूरी है. अगर आपको हाई सीरियसनेस देखने को मिलता है and you are comparing your art form with the art form written by them like Dante, Shakespeare or Homer, so you found profound thought is there, perfect expression is there, elevated emotion is there, then it is a good art, it is high form of art. Okay, otherwise it is not a good art. So that was the method which Arnold called touchstone method, high seriousness hona chahiye. Okay, anyway, so by keeping such exemplary lines in mind, readers develop an intuitive sense for genuine poetic merit. So this is how Arnold develops his critical view on poetry, on art, better to say high art. Okay, ठीक है, आगे बढ़ते हैं. द रोल ऑफ द क्रिटिक का रोल क्या होना चाहिए आर्नल्ड बताए हैं. Arnold's vision of literary judgment. अच्छा, अब बताइए तो कि अभी आपको क्या लग रहा है, आपके हिसाब से क्या हो सकता है कि व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ क्रिटिक अकॉर्डिंग टू आर्नल्ड. आर्नल्ड के मुताबिक क्रिटिक का रोल क्या हो सकता है. बताइए तो. Can you write down one line? What should be the role of a critic according to Matthew Arnold? I'm waiting. यस, क्रिटिक का रोल क्या होना चाहिए आर्नल्ड के मुताबिक? The role of the critic. So Arnold revolutionized critical theory by elevating the critic's function to something approaching sacred duty. Okay. In the next essay, which is also prescribed in our syllabus, the function of criticism at a present time. The function of criticism at a present time, which was published in 1864, he argued that criticism prepares the ground for creative genius by establishing cultural standards and disseminating the best that has been thought and said. Again, that touched on spirit. Okay, so how do you understand this? What should be the critic's role? The critic's role should be based on, the critic's role should be very approaching, should be sacred a duty. He must measure the quality of the art. How? By comparing your art form with the classics. If it possesses the profound thought, elevated emotion, and perfect expression, so it can qualify to have high seriousness. That should be the role of a critic. Okay. डिसइंटरेस्टेडनेस, ये वर्ड आया था पिछले क्लास में. डिसइंटरेस्टेड क्रिटिसिज्म. Critics must transcend personal bias. There should not be any personal biasness. There should not be any partiality. There should not be any favoritism. There must not be any political allegiance. It must not have any commercial pressure. Their sole aim, recognizing and promoting excellence wherever it appears. Okay? Only identifying excellence, only promoting excellence. Excellence के पीछे भागना है, excellence को ढूंढना है. That is the role of disinterested critic. Disinterested critic का मतलब है कि अपना खुद का पर्सनल इंटरेस्ट नहीं लगाना है उसमें, इमोशनल अटैचमेंट नहीं होना है उसमें. ओके, कोई पर्सनल बायसनेस नहीं आना चाहिए. डिसइंटरेस्टेड वर्ड का यहाँ पे मतलब है ऑब्जेक्टिव, क्रिटिकल. दैट्स अ डिसइंटरेस्टेड क्रिटिक. ओके, ये टर्म बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है यहाँ पे. डिसइंटरेस्टेड क्रिटिसिज्म क्या होता है? So disinterested criticism refers to a criticism which must be which must avoid any personal bias or any personal interpretation into the analysis. It must be objective, critical, analytical, not subjective, very objective, scientific. ठीक है. Next point, cultural authority. Critics serve as mediators between great works and general readers, making sophisticated judgments accessible while maintaining rigorous standards. Critics का यहाँ पे काम कैसा है? Mediator जैसा. It will mediate the two bridge, the two communicators. Who are they? One is the great work, another is the reader. Okay? And then comes educational mission. Though careful analysis and explanation, critics educate public taste, gradually raising society's cultural literacy and appreciation for genuine art. So genuine art को देखना पड़ेगा, क्यों किसी भी तरीके का art हो, no, art has to have certain standards of excellence. It must possess high seriousness. Okay, and then intellectual freedom. So criticism flourishes in an atmosphere of free play of mind, open inquiry, unbound by any dogma, no superstition, no restriction, no sort of no boundaries, encouraging fresh perspectives on established works. So these are the important aspects which a critic must rely on. Okay, so the critic must keep out of the region of immediate practice. He must be bound by no interest, no practical consideration, whatever. It must be very objective, scientific, and analytical bent. ठीक है, चलो next point. Essays in criticism and the function of critical authority. Arnold also wrote another essay called Essays in Criticism. It was first series came out in 1865. Second series came out in 1888. Right? It demonstrates his critical principles in practice. These elegant urban essays combined scholarly rigor with accessible prose, examining writers from ancient Greece to contemporary France. Arnold championed European literature, urging British readers beyond insular provincialism. Okay. So comparative method. His method is comparative. Arnold constantly referenced continental writers, showing how French clarity or German profundity enriched understanding of English literature. This cosmopolitan approach challenged narrow nationalism. So Arnold, though belonged to England, does not confine himself into a narrow nationalism. Okay, he transcends boundaries with different schools of thought, with different knowledge, with different ideas, critical and poetic ideas. So we can say Matthew Arnold is a sort of transnational critic because he transcends boundaries with different schools of thoughts, ideas, views. Unlike other poets, he is not restricted into his nationalist regime. He went beyond the confines of Britain and drew knowledge, several different kinds of knowledge from different schools of thought, which makes him transnational critic and poet as well. Okay. Then comes historical awareness. He situated writers within cultural moments whilst assessing their permanent value. Historical context illuminates without excusing mediocrity or diminishing genuine excellence. Okay, so excellence is the most important rewarding factor in Arnold's poetic art. Okay? Stylistic elegance. Arnold's own prose exemplified his value: clarity, proportion, grace. He believed critical writing should itself aspire to literary merit, demonstrating through style what it advocated in principle. Okay, so style also must be what kind of style? A style which has been appreciated and acknowledged in the world, the best style in literary discourse. And where do you find that? In the classics. Critical authority in democracy. Arnold worried that democratic reforms might produce cultural leveling, valuing popularity over quality. So, in the Victorian age, popular culture became popular culture becomes very prominent. Popular culture, popular writing, popular literature. So, popularity, one of the important key factors in the late Victorian age, because popularity is something that serves to the public, that feeds on the mass. Okay, the demanding aspect of mass comes from popularity of any product. It can be any item, it can be any cosmetic product, it can be any cultural item, it can be any kind of art form. If it is popular, it will serve to the public. If it is not popular, it will not sell and will not serve to the public. So popularity becomes very important in the late Victorian era. So a work of art which has value, which has taste, doesn't matter. What matters is the chalan, is the popularity, which is something which is on trend. And this trend having value or having not no value doesn't matter. What matters, the trend, the popularity of something. So this popularity became very popular from the late Victorian period. Okay, so valuing popularity, people value popularity over quality. Okay, critics, he argued, must resist market forces and populist sentiment. Okay, courageously defending standards against Philistine indifference or hostile incomprehension. Hostile, very much insisting, no, without having any understanding, no understanding. Trend may not have always value or great sense of art, right? But that is unfortunate. From the late Victorian era to today, to our contemporary times, it is popularity, it is trend, which is over appreciated, which is overhyped than the value of it. Okay. So now, moving ahead. Poetry versus religion, Arnold, secular humanism, religion's declining authority, Victorian scientific advances, and biblical criticism undermined traditional faith. Arnold acknowledged this cultural shift, predicting that dogmatic religion would lose its hold on educated minds. So we understand the importance of poetry, how poetry is at bottom a criticism of life, very important line, and the most popular line, that's why we know this. Poetry is the criticism of life, said by Arnold, positioned literature as humanity's primary means of ethical reflection. Only poetry can give you peace, poetry can give you moral direction in this Victorian era of disorder and chaos. Emotional truth, unlike science, which explains mechanisms, or philosophy, which constructs systems, poetry speaks directly to lived experience with beauty and immediacy. Okay, so poetry speaks with human lived experience. Poetry works with lived reality of life. Okay, so this is religion historically provided moral frameworks for conduct, consolation in suffering, community and shared values, transcendent meaning. But in the Victorian age, well, religion is into crisis. Religion no longer is able to provide peace, moral concern. It is under crisis. It has been superseded, it has been replaced by science. Okay, so there a question comes, right? And we need to understand that question. Can poetry truly replace religion social functions? So that is a very important question we need to understand. Okay. And what great poetry offers, according to Matthew Arnold, ethical insight through example, emotional catharsis and understanding. Catharsis. What is catharsis? Catharsis was a religious word in the Aristotelian time, in the classical times. Catharsis means purification of emotion. Well, emotion, two types of emotion it talks about, pity and fear, purification of emotion. Okay, so your emotion, your strong emotions will be purged off, and you will get release, you will get peace, and your mind will become calm and tranquil. That is catharsis. Okay, so you will get emotional catharsis. Poetry will give you that. Cultural cohesion through shared texts, experiences of beauty and elevation. Okay, so these are the takeaways that poetry can give you, even in the Victorian disorder, even in the decentered universe of Victorian era. Okay, so that's the difference that we make between poetry and religion. What religious could give, and what poetry can give right now. Okay, now the canon and cultural value. What makes literature endure? So Arnold touched on method implicitly argues for a literary canon, a collection of masterworks representing humanity's highest artistic achievements. But what criteria determine canonical status? Arnold's answer combined aesthetic excellence with moral seriousness and high seriousness, creating standards both inspiring and controversial भी है. ओके, तो पहले देख लेते हैं क्या क्या स्टैंडर्ड्स के बारे में बात किए हैं आर्नल्ड. ठीक है, कि क्या क्या स्टैंडर्ड है. टाइमलेस यूनिवर्सलिटी. एक आर्ट में आर्ट ऐसा होना चाहिए विच कैन हैव टाइमलेस यूनिवर्सलिटी, कहीं भी वो एप्लीकेबल है. तो शेक्सपियर के राइटिंग में हमें देखने को मिलता है, हिज वर्क्स आर टाइमलेस, हिज वर्क्स हैव यूनिवर्सल अपील. देन हाई सीरियसनेस होना चाहिए, टेक्निकल मास्टरी होना चाहिए, मोरल इंसाइट होना चाहिए, ब्यूटीफुल एक्सप्रेशन होना चाहिए. If all these elements are available in that art, so it is considered to be a high art, like a classic. Okay, so Arnold believed certain works transcend their historical moments, speaking to permanent aspects of human nature. हो सकता है Macbeth has been enacted on stage in the 15th or 16th century, but we see Macbeth here and there surrounding our life. We see Macbeth in us. We see Macbeth in others. Okay, so the location of the drama Macbeth can have 16th century older, but we can even see Macbeth in the 21st century, and that shows timeless appeal, that shows universal appeal, that shows permanent aspect of human nature. Well, Macbeth had a halting ambition. Macbeth had over-ambitious nature, and we see many human having over-ambitious nature. And due to having over-ambitious nature, like Macbeth, those people also commit error of judgment. Those people also commit hamartia, error of judgment, and for that hamartia, they go through suffering. Okay, so Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, these are the writers where they achieved something absolute. They created benchmarks. Okay, though their works have been historically located and framed in different timeline, but still they show off certain timeless appeal and universal appeal. That's why we read them even today. Okay, now cultural continuity. So that was the canonical works like Dante, Homer, Shakespeare. Repetitively, Arnold talks about those writers. Okay, next. His influence on modern literary criticism. Okay, Arnold's critical legacy extends far beyond Victorian England. The kind of writing, the kind of approach he upholds is very inspiring and influential on the age coming in the descending time. So one is new criticism. It came in 1930s to and it continued up to 1960s. Okay, American new critics adopted Arnold's focus on textual analysis. So Arnold focus text analysis zaruri hai. Read the text, look into the text, find the quality, find does it have those qualities, whether it has those high seriousness or not. So similarly, a new group called New Critics, and they developed their movement called New Criticism. They say, read words on the page, read words on the page, textual analysis. It must be textual criticism. Forget the biography of the writer. Just read words on the page. It is just a close reading of the text. Okay, so textual analysis होना चाहिए. Intrinsic merit, though they rejected moral emphasis, close reading became academic orthodoxy, treating poems as autonomous aesthetic objects. Okay, so new criticism is there, then comes some other cultural studies is there, but you know Matthew Arnold's concept theory of culture, art has been challenged by many modern literary critics like Raymond Williams and Stuart Hall. They critiqued Arnold's elitism, high seriousness होना चाहिए. So that elitist attitude has been challenged by critics like Raymond Williams and Stuart Hall. Raymond Williams, who is one of the famous Marxist literary critic, and Stuart Hall is one of the leading cultural critics. Okay, they critique Arnold's elitism while retaining his belief in culture's social importance. कल्चर का सोशल इम्पोर्टेंस होना तो चाहिए, लेकिन उसके वजह उसके लिए आर्ट या कल्चर को हाई सीरियस होना पड़ेगा, जेन्युइन होना पड़ेगा, हाई सीरियस तक पहुंचना पड़ेगा. उसके लिए हमें क्लासिक को पढ़ के ही उसी के ऊपर बेस करके हाई सीरियसनेस पहुंच पाएंगे. दिस इज वेरी वन वे and subjective, not very much objective. हालांकि वो objective की बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उसका approach काफी subjective है. That is a problem in Arnold's case. Okay, and then Lewisism. F.R. Lewis extends Arnold's mission arguing for literature's centrality in education. इनका एक जर्नल था लेविस का, स्क्रूटिनी, embodied Arnoldian cultural criticism, championing discrimination and evaluative judgment. So Lewis, F.R. Lewis talks about Arnold in his journal Scrutiny. वो भी एक important part है. Just to know about who wrote on Arnold and in which journal? Schaefer Levis in his journal Scrutiny. Okay, bas. So last point here we see Arnold's critical framework today. So Arnold's critical framework continues provoking debate about fundamental issues like can literature be objectively evaluated? ऑब्जेक्टिवली आप इवेल्युएट करोगे किस बेसिस पे हम इवेल्युएट कर पाएंगे किसी एक लिटरेचर को किस चीज को आप हाईएस्ट बोल सकते हैं कौन सी चीज को आप बोलेंगे इज अ सुप्रीम आर्ट बेस्ड ऑन दैट well what is supreme today may not remain supreme tomorrow okay should critics guide public taste कोई पब्लिक टेस्ट क्या होगा वो क्रिटिक्स बताएंगे क्या मतलब मेरा पब्लिक टेस्ट क्या होगा वो क्रिटिक्स बताएंगे तो उस टेस्ट को मैं डेवलप करूंगा योर पब्लिक टेस्ट कैन बी सेवरल it can be different varying degrees of taste and that is subject to change over time and context. What role does art play in secular society? You know, a public before this question public taste is subject to spatio-temporal context. आपका टेस्ट your taste is the source of your socio-political cultural background. If your socio-political cultural background changes, your public taste may change also. Okay. These questions gained new urgency in our digital age of demonstrated opinion and fragmented culture. So that's why you need to understand these things. Okay. So what we got from Matthew Arnold's two essay, The Study of Poetry and The Function of Criticism at a Present Time. So we see that Matthew Arnold gives his definition of poetry. Poetry is at bottom the criticism of life. Poetry is the supreme art form. It is not religion, it is not philosophy, it is poetry, which can give stability, which can give peace amidst this Victorian disorder, amidst this Victorian decentered universe. And he talks about in the essays, the study of poetry here, the Tuston method. We need to evaluate and measure the objective standards of high seriousness, whether it has the high seriousness. By high seriousness, he means to say elevated emotion and perfect expression, profound thought. If it has all those qualities, so it has high seriousness. And by comparing with the base, and what is the base for Arnold? The classic literature, the classic art, the classic culture. And you will find similarities and difference. If you find it, then it is good art. Otherwise, it doesn't have the merit. It doesn't have the intellectual merit. Okay, so and this is how we can find out excellence for art. This is what Arnold says. Okay, and what is the role of critic? Critic's role is objective. Critic's role is a sort of, he says, critic को कैसा होना चाहिए? Critic must be a disinterested critic. Now, what do you mean by disinterested critic? Disinterested matlab a critic must not indulge, must not involve his or her personal bias or personal interpretation. He must keep his scientific and objective outlook towards the text, and he is a sort of mediator between the great art and the general readers. Okay, so these are the concepts that Matthew Arnold talks about in both his essays, The Study of Poetry and The Function of Criticism at a Present Time. Okay, well, if you ask me what kind of poet he is, well, I say he is a great poet. What kind of critic he is, well, I do not consider Matthew Arnold as a great critic. He is undoubtedly a great poet, one of the leading Victorian poets. But as a critic, he has certain reservations. He has certain elitist outlook, saying high seriousness, high culture, high taste. But what is high today may not remain high tomorrow. Okay, so based on these subjective ideas, his theoretical views are not quite sustainable, and that's why we see the criticism in the 20th century against Arnold's critical poetic theory. But anyway, the idea, the concern for social change, the objectivity, and the popular concepts like touchstone method, definition of poetry by Arnold, these are important questions. That's why we need to read him. But as a poet, he is a master. As a critique, he has certain reservations that we understood, hopefully. Thank you so much. आज के लिए इतना ही. In the next class, I will come up with Charles Dickens, Victorian novelist. Okay, Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist. Good night. Thank you so much.